Welcome to another episode of the Bark Brigade podcast by Doggozila Magazine.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this one.
Yeah, me too. So, did you know that when you bring an 8-week-old puppy into your home, their brain is literally forming millions of new neural pathways every single day?
It's honestly wild to think about.
Right. Their central nervous system is essentially, wet clay. And one wrong move with, say, how you introduce them to a baby gate or even how you react when they chew on your favorite shoe.
Oh, the classic shoe chewing.
Exactly. You could accidentally hardwire them for a lifetime of anxiety just from that. So today we are doing a deep dive into the source material from Doggozila Magazine.
And we are totally tearing apart that whimsical golden hour fantasy of puppy ownership.
Yeah, we're taking their incredibly comprehensive editorial guide and subjecting it to a rigorous, scientific and psychological breakdown, because our mission today is to give you, the listener, the ultimate roadmap.
From the actual neurological reality of pulling an animal out of its litter, right down to the precise behavioral mechanics of building that unbreakable bond.
Because the contrast between the cultural myth of getting a puppy and the actual biological reality is, it's staggering.
It really is. We're conditioned by media to expect this frictionless integration of a fluffy companion into our lives, right?
Like a Disney movie.
Exactly, like magic. But in reality, you are taking a rapidly developing predator, bringing it into a completely synthetic human environment, and just expecting it to seamlessly understand complex social rules.
Which is crazy when you say it out loud.
Right, and that's why this Doggozila roadmap is so critical. It forces us to actually confront the biology and psychology of the animal rather than just our romanticized projection of it.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the very first psychological hurdle the human has to overcome. Because we really have to transition from that purely emotional impulse of, I want a cute dog, to the highly logical and honestly unforgiving reality of behavioral genetics.
Yeah, you really can't skip that step.
The source article insists that researching and selecting the correct breed is the non-negotiable foundation of this entire endeavor. But, I look at how people actually choose dogs, and it seems entirely aesthetic.
Oh, 100%. It's all about the look.
Right. We scroll through social media, we see a sleek Weimaraner or a heavily wrinkled English bulldog, and we make a choice based purely on visual appeal.
Which is a huge mistake.
It strikes me as like downloading a highly specialized, heavy-duty software program into a laptop that just doesn't have the hardware to run it.
That operating system analogy is incredibly accurate, actually. Because when you look at a breed, you're not just looking at a cute face. You are looking at hundreds, sometimes thousands of years of selective genetic engineering.
Wow, yeah. We didn't just breed for coat color.
Not at all. We bred for very specific motor patterns. Take a border collie, for example.
Yeah.
It has been hardwired to stare down, stalk, and control the movement of other animals over vast, rugged terrain. That is its operating system. So if you download that herding dog OS into the hardware of a one-bedroom apartment in a dense city...
With a human who only wants to take like a 15-minute stroll a day?
Exactly. The software is constantly going to run background scripts looking for sheep to herd. And when it can't find them, the system crashes.
And what does that crash look like in a dog?
Well, it manifests as the dog chewing through your drywall, or developing obsessive-compulsive tail chasing, or becoming highly reactive to bicycles on the street.
But let me push back on the inevitability of that just for a second. Say someone falls in love with the sheer athleticism of a working dog, and they do live in that apartment, but they are convinced that their affection will bridge the gap.
Right. The love is enough argument.
Exactly. We hear this narrative all the time, that a dog just needs enough love and it'll adapt to whatever environment it's in. Does the neuroplasticity of a puppy allow it to override its genetic baseline if the human is just dedicated enough?
Yeah.
Can love conquer all?
Look, affection does not rewrite DNA. It just doesn't.
Wow. Okay.
What the Doggozila source really anchors us to is the reality that ignoring those variables, size, metabolic energy, specific cognitive needs, it's actually a failure of empathy.
A failure of empathy. I like that framing.
Because when a working dog's biological imperatives are suppressed, their cortisol levels remain chronically elevated. They basically exist in a state of perpetual physiological stress.
Which sounds miserable.
It is. So acknowledging the spatial, financial, and temporal requirements of a breed is actually the highest form of love you can offer. It's having the maturity to look at an animal and say, I am not equipped to give your genetics what they require to thrive.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And furthermore, this genetic research gives you a vital heads up on morphological health problems, right?
Absolutely.
Like a flat-faced breed, like a French bulldog, brings inherent respiratory constraints. Preparing for the financial reality of potential airway surgery is a fundamental part of the selection process, according to the source.
You have to know what you're buying into, literally and figuratively.
Right. So, assuming you've done the rigorous self-audit and identified a breed profile that actually matches your lifestyle's bandwidth, the next mandate in the text involves sourcing. Where is this biological package coming from?
The who and the where.
Exactly. The article highlights two avenues: reputable breeders and shelters. And it uses the term reputable breeder very deliberately. I kind of want to dissect that adjective.
Let's do it.
Because a lot of people assume that if a puppy costs, say, $3,000 and comes with a piece of paper, it's reputable. But the source indicates that the pedigree and health records are serving a much deeper function than just signaling status.
A pedigree has absolutely nothing to do with elitism. It has everything to do with epidemiological mapping.
Epidemiological mapping, explain that.
So, a genuinely reputable breeder utilizes that genetic map to actively select against hereditary pathologies. They're studying the orthopedic foundations, the cardiac history, and the neurological stability of the lineage.
They're essentially scientists at that point.
Pretty much. And when the article mentions that good breeders care about the long-term safety of the dogs, it's referring to a breeder's willingness to act as a lifelong safety net.
Meaning they'll take the dog back.
Yes.
But
A responsible breeder contractually mandates that the dog must be returned to them if the owner can no longer care for it. It ensures their genetic output never ever burdens the shelter system.
which brings us to the shelter and rescue route, a path the article heavily endorses, noting that mixed-breed puppies make remarkable companions.
They really do.
But there's a concept often thrown around: hybrid vigor. The idea that mixing breeds somehow dilutes the genetic flaws. Is that a biological reality or just a comforting myth we tell ourselves about rescue dogs?
No, it is a biological reality. It's a scientifically termed heterosis.
A heterosis. Okay.
Yeah. When you expand the genetic pool, you reduce the probability of homozygous recessive traits expressing themselves, which is basically a technical way of saying that the specific genetic illnesses that plague heavily inbred, purebred lines are often masked or eliminated in mixed breeds.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. But the source astutely advises asking about the puppy's background when adopting, right?
Crucial step. Because while their physical genetics might be robust, their early environmental exposure is often a massive blank spot.
So you're adopting a mystery.
Right, you need to investigate any potential trauma or critical socialization gaps that occurred before they arrived at the shelter.
And that investigative rigor applies to both avenues because the text delivers a firm mandate to avoid puppy mills and irresponsible backyard breeders.
At all costs.
And while it's easy to dismiss those sources purely on moral grounds, which we should look at it from a behavioral science perspective, a puppy born in a commercial breeding facility isn't just ethically compromised, right? It is biologically compromised from the moment of conception.
Deeply compromised. I mean, we have to look at the epigenetics of stress here.
Epigenetics. Okay, break that down for us.
If a mother dog is confined in a highly stressful, unsanitary environment, her endocrine system is just flooding her body with cortisol, and that cortisol crosses the placental barrier.
Oh, wow. So the puppies are affected before they're even born.
Exactly. You end up with a litter of puppies whose developing brains are literally bathed in stress hormones before they take their first breath.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. Their baseline for anxiety is permanently altered. Their amygdala, the fear center of the brain, is hyperreactive.
So by purchasing from a pet store that sources from mills, you aren't just funding an atrocious industry.
No, you are bringing a neurologically damaged predator into your home. You're setting your family up for years of severe behavioral remediation and, honestly, exorbitant veterinary costs.
That framing completely shifts the conversation from just a moral plea to an objective health reality. So, okay, we've navigated the sourcing. We know the genetic profile of the animal entering the home. Now we have to prepare the physical environment for its arrival.
Time to fortify the castle.
Exactly. The text transitions into puppy-proofing, describing them as curious little explorers. That feels like a drastic understatement, to be honest.
That's a very polite way of saying they get into everything.
Right. From what I understand about canine sensory perception, a puppy isn't just looking at the world, they're literally consuming it to understand it.
Yes, you have to fundamentally alter your understanding of spatial awareness. Humans are visual creatures. But a puppy is an olfactory and tactile creature.
They live through their noses.
They possess up to 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our 6 million. When they walk into your living room, they aren't seeing a cohesive space. They're overwhelmed by this microscopic topography of scents.
Like what?
Like the chemical residue of your floor cleaner, the organic compounds in your toxic houseplants, or even the localized scent of a dropped staple hiding in the rug.
And because they lack opposable thumbs, their primary mechanism for investigating these complex scent profiles is their mouth.
Bingo. Everything goes in the mouth.
Which means the standard human perspective is basically useless. You can't stand at 6 feet tall and declare a room safe. You have to physically lower your center of gravity to their level.
You literally have to get on your hands and knees.
Yeah, when you get your eyes 8 inches off the ground, the environment transforms. An exposed electrical cord isn't just clutter, it is a highly textured, chewable fine.
A dropped coin is a fascinating metallic disc to swallow.
Exactly. So the article insists on removing toxic plants, chemicals, and swallowing hazards, but it also strongly advocates for the use of baby gates to restrict access.
This is where people usually push back.
Yeah, I've known people who resist this. They feel guilty. They think, I just brought this dog into its forever home. Why am I barricading it in the kitchen? It feels like a prison.
And that human guilt stems from projecting our own psychology onto the animal.
Right.
To a human, a sprawling open floor plan represents freedom and luxury. But to an 8-week-old canine whose nervous system is already overloaded by the sheer novelty of being separated from its litter, a massive open space is terrifying.
So they want smaller spaces.
In the wild, canine mothers utilize tight, enclosed dens to foster security. By deploying baby gates to restrict the puppy to a single, hyper-secured room, you are drastically lowering their cognitive load.
You're providing them with a manageable territory where they can map the scents, predict the layout, and ultimately downregulate their central nervous system.
Exactly. It is not restriction. It's profound psychological relief.
And that concept of the den naturally extends to the yard, too. The text urges a full perimeter check of your fencing, specifically warning that puppies love to dig.
Oh, the digging.
We tend to view digging as spiteful behavior, right? Like a deliberate attempt to ruin the landscaping. But if we examine the evolutionary biology of the canine, digging is a deeply ingrained motor pattern.
It serves multiple evolutionary purposes. Depending on the breed's ancestral lineage, digging is utilized to unearth burrowing rodents or to create a thermal refuge by exposing cool earth during high temperatures.
Or sometimes just as an outlet for unexpended kinetic energy, right?
Yeah, just burning off steam. But in the context of a new puppy, the primary risk is perimeter breach. A puppy's instinct to follow a novel scent trail, say, a squirrel or a neighbor's barbecue, will entirely override their spatial memory of where their safe zone is.
Yeah.
So a microscopic gap under a chain link fence is just an invitation to disaster.
So the perimeter is locked down, the interior is sanitized of hazards and compartmentalized. Now we have to outfit this safe zone.
The gear list.
The article lists an array of essential supplies, and rather than just reading it like a baby registry or a grocery list, I want to look at it as an infrastructure of care.
I like that.
We have the cozy bed or crate, the high-quality food in bowls, the collar and ID tags, chew toys, training pads, and grooming supplies. If we view this toolkit through the lens of that same canine psychology we just discussed, the crate isn't just a bed.
Not at all.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the maternal den.
Precisely. When introduced with correct, positive reinforcement, the crate functions as the puppy's autonomous safe space. It's essentially a sensory deprivation chamber in the best possible way.
So when things get crazy in the house...
Yeah, when the human household becomes chaotic with loud noises or unfamiliar guests, the puppy has a predetermined refuge where they know the environment is completely static and secure.
And then there's the high-quality puppy food, which the text emphasizes heavily. People might wonder why they can't just feed the puppy a smaller portion of whatever the adult dog is eating.
Oh, that's a huge mistake.
Because the metabolic rate of a puppy, the sheer speed of their cellular division and bone growth, requires a completely different biochemical input, doesn't it?
The physiological demands are staggering, honestly. A puppy's skeletal structure is actively laying down calcium and phosphorus at a precise ratio to form healthy bone density.
So what happens if you give them adult food?
If you feed them adult maintenance food, you are starving their developing brain of crucial omega fatty acids like DHA, and you risk severe orthopedic deformities due to improper calcium ratios.
It's the difference between rocket fuel and standard unleaded.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of biological imperatives, let's talk about the chew toys mentioned in the kit. The article includes them for fun and mental stimulation, but the necessity of chewing goes much deeper than just keeping them entertained.
It is a biomechanical necessity. Around 3 to 4 months of age, a puppy undergoes the intense physiological process of shedding their deciduous teeth, their baby teeth, and erupting adult molars and canines.
Which has to hurt.
It causes significant gingival inflammation and pain. So, chewing on dense, appropriate textures massages the gums and physically aids in the eruption of the new teeth.
And if you don't give them something to chew on,
If you do not provide an engineered outlet for this biomechanical need, the dog will independently source relief, which is exactly how you lose a dining room table leg.
or a laptop charger. By having the complete kit ready before the dog crosses the threshold, you preemptively solve these biological crises.
Exactly.
So the physical environment is secured and supplied. Now, the Doggozila Guide shifts our focus toward the internal health and the structural rhythms of the dog's new life.
Right, the daily operations.
We are moving from the architecture of the home to the architecture of their routine, starting with a mandatory baseline check at the veterinarian. The instruction here is to schedule this visit before or immediately after bringing the puppy home.
Time is of the essence.
It feels like an incredibly tight timeline. Why the rush? If the breeder or shelter said the dog is fine, why can't we just, settle in for a few weeks first?
Because you are navigating a microscopic war zone within the puppy's immune system.
A microscopic war zone.
Okay. When a puppy nurses, they receive maternal antibodies that provide passive immunity against environmental pathogens. But around 8 to 12 weeks of age, those maternal antibodies degrade rapidly,
Leaving them exposed.
leaving a terrifying window of vulnerability
Yeah.
before their own immune system can mount a defense. The vet visit is literally a race against that degradation.
The article specifically points to vaccines, highlighting the 5-in-1 vaccine in a sidebar, alongside deworming and parasite prevention. It highlights that the vet is establishing a schedule.
That 5-in-1 or DAPPV vaccine is the absolute cornerstone of canine survival in a modern environment. It inoculates against distemper, adenovirus, parainfluenza, and crucially, parvovirus.
Parvo is the scary one, right?
Parvovirus is an incredibly resilient gastrointestinal virus that can survive in soil for years. Without the complete staggered series of vaccinations that your vet will schedule, a simple walk on a contaminated patch of grass can be fatal.
That's terrifying. And what about the deworming?
Almost all puppies are born with a parasitic load, usually roundworms or hookworms, passed through the placenta or milk. The vet is aggressively clearing these internal burdens so the puppy's metabolism can focus entirely on growth rather than fighting off parasites.
Beyond the pharmacological interventions, the text positions the veterinarian as a partner in care, food, and training advice.
They're your biggest ally.
Right. This implies that the initial visit is less about a transaction and more about establishing a long-term data baseline. If a dog eats a toxic plant 2 years from now, having a vet who knows their baseline cardiac rhythm and metabolic history could be the difference between a quick intervention and a catastrophe.
Exactly. You are integrating the vet into the dog's life narrative right from the start. And that concept of structural integration leads directly into the next major mandate from the source material, the psychology of routine.
Right. The text plainly states that puppies thrive on regular schedules.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism of why routine holds such power. We touched on the idea earlier that the human world is chaotic to a puppy.
Yeah, it's just noise to them.
When a dog doesn't know when the next meal is coming or when they'll be allowed outside to relieve themselves, their nervous system must remain vigilant.
Like they're always on edge.
It's the difference between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems.
Yeah.
Without routine, a puppy is locked in a mild sympathetic state, basically fight, flight, or hypervigilance. They are constantly scanning the environment to predict what will happen next.
And when you add routine,
When you implement a rigid schedule, wake up, go outside, eat, play, sleep, you remove the cognitive burden of prediction. The environment becomes legible to them.
oh, that's a great word, legible.
Their nervous system shifts into a parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest. And a puppy can only retain training, learn manners, and bond with you when their brain is in that relaxed parasympathetic state.
I can completely visualize that, but let me play devil's advocate on behalf of the exhausted listener,
Go for it.
People get a dog for companionship, for the joy of sharing a Saturday afternoon. If you lock yourself into an airtight schedule, doesn't the human become a prisoner to the dog's biology? What happens to spontaneity?
It is the great paradox of dog training, honestly. In the immediate term, yes. Enforcing a rigid schedule for a new puppy requires intense monastic discipline from the human.
So no sleeping in.
You cannot sleep in. You cannot take a spontaneous weekend trip. But that intense early consistency is an investment that yields massive dividends of freedom later on.
How so?
When you hardwire predictability into a dog's developing brain, you forge an incredibly secure, emotionally resilient adult dog. A year later, that secure dog can absolutely handle a spontaneous road trip or a chaotic Saturday barbecue because their foundational trust in you is unshakable.
Right.
If you demand spontaneity on day one, you cultivate an anxious, erratic dog that will dictate or restrict your movements for the next decade.
Early consistency buys you freedom later. That is brilliant distillation. So let's examine the anatomy of this routine. The guide breaks down the dog's day into 4 fundamental pillars: food, sleep, potty, and exercise.
The big 4.
Let's start with the first pillar: food. The text specifies that puppies have small stomachs and require frequent meals to sustain their energy, strongly cautioning against overfeeding.
Gastric volume in a young puppy is incredibly limited, while their caloric requirement for growth is astronomical.
So you can't just give them one big bowl.
If you attempt to deliver their daily caloric load in a single morning feeding, their gastrointestinal tract simply cannot process it. It leads to rapid fermentation, gas, and severe distress. You have to distribute the load across 3 to 4 precisely measured meals.
And the warning about overfeeding is critical because I feel like we have a cultural blind spot regarding pet weight. We often equate food with love, and a slightly chubby puppy is viewed as endearing.
It's dangerous, though.
Biologically, what is that excess weight doing to a frame that hasn't finished building itself?
It is devastating. When a puppy carries excess adipose tissue, that weight is bearing down on joints and cartilage that are still soft and forming. It exponentially increases the risk of developmental orthopedic diseases, like hip dysplasia or osteochondritis. By weighing the food and serving it at fixed intervals, you aren't just controlling their growth curve, you're regulating their digestion, which directly feeds into our ability to housebreak them.
Which brings us to the second pillar: sleep. The article states that puppies need lots of sleep to grow, and without it, they become tired and grumpy. That phrasing, tired and grumpy, feels a bit euphemistic to me.
Just a bit.
Because when a human baby is overtired, their cortisol spikes and they just lose their minds. I assume the canine equivalent is similar?
It is identical. A developing puppy requires roughly 18 to 20 hours of sleep per 24-hour cycle.
Wow, 20 hours.
Yeah. During deep REM sleep, their brain is consolidating the day's learning, and their body is releasing human growth hormone equivalents essential for physical development. If they are kept awake by a bustling household, their cortisol levels remain elevated, shutting down the learning centers of their brain.
They just get wired.
They become hyper-aroused, they bite harder, they cannot focus, and they lose all impulse control.
So you have to enforce nap time, likely utilizing that crate we set up earlier. But there is a very specific, almost severe warning nestled in the sleep section of the Doggozila guide. Don't let your puppy sleep in your bed.
A hard rule for a lot of people to follow.
Right, because this is where the biological necessity collides violently with human emotion. You have a tiny, soft animal that has just been separated from its litter. It's crying. The human instinct is to pull it into bed and soothe it. What is the psychological danger of giving in to that instinct?
The danger is twofold, and it alters the trajectory of the dog's behavioral development. First, we must consider canine resource theory.
Resource theory.
A bed is elevated, it smells intensely of the human, and is a place of profound rest. To a dog, it is the most highly valued resource in the territory. Allowing a puppy unearned access to this resource can, in certain temperaments, trigger resource guarding, where they begin to dictate who is allowed in the bed.
Like growling at your partner. But even if the dog doesn't become aggressive, there's a secondary issue related to dependency, isn't there?
Yes, and this is the more insidious problem: the fostering of severe separation anxiety.
Oh, because they rely on you to sleep?
Exactly. If a puppy's only mechanism for achieving a parasympathetic state for calming down enough to sleep requires the physical warmth and contact of your body, they never develop the neural pathways for self-soothing.
They don't know how to calm themselves down.
You're teaching them that isolation equals danger. When you eventually have to leave the house for work, their brain registers it as a life-threatening abandonment, leading to destructive panic.
Right.
Forcing them to sleep in their own designated secure spot is the psychological gift of independence.
It's tough love, but it is necessary for their long-term mental health. Now, moving to the third pillar, the one that causes the most human distress: potty training.
Everyone's favorite.
The guide focuses heavily on observation, listing physical signs like sniffing the floor and walking in circles. It's clear that success here relies on the human's ability to intercept the behavior before it happens.
Housebreaking is fundamentally an exercise in human vigilance, not canine morality.
I love that.
Because the sphincter control of an 8-week-old puppy is practically non-existent. When the biological signal reaches their brain that the bladder is full, they have seconds to act. The sniffing and the tight circling are the external manifestations of that internal pressure.
And the human has to catch that.
The moment the human observes those signals, or better yet, anticipates them, based on the fixed feeding and sleeping schedule we just discussed, they must peacefully intercept and relocate the dog to the designated outdoor area.
And when the dog successfully goes outside, the article instructs the owner to praise and give treats to reinforce the good behavior. We're moving out of mere husbandry and into the mechanics of operant conditioning here.
Exactly. You are leveraging the dog's dopamine system. When the puppy relieves itself on the living room rug, they experience the baseline biological relief of an empty bladder.
Right.
But when they relieve themselves on the grass outside, and you immediately deliver a high-value food reward and enthusiastic praise, you create a dopamine spike.
You're paying them for going outside.
The brain registers a reward prediction error. Going outside isn't just a biological relief, it is a highly profitable action. Because dogs are opportunistic learners, they'll rapidly begin to choose the behavior that yields the highest return on investment.
The article also adds a crucial caveat. Be patient, as accidents are normal. And I want to dig into the neurobiology of why punishing an accident is so counterproductive. If I catch the puppy peeing on the rug and I yell or, swat them with a newspaper, why doesn't that teach them that peeing inside is wrong?
Because you are assuming the dog understands the spatial context of the punishment. They do not.
They don't connect it to the rug.
No. If you scream at a puppy while they are urinating, you trigger an immediate amygdala hijack. Their brain floods with fear. They do not think, the living room rug is an inappropriate location for this.
What do they think?
They think, the act of emptying my bladder in the presence of my human is a life-threatening event. You haven't taught them to go outside. You have taught them to hide from you when they need to eliminate. They will simply start sneaking behind the sofa to do it where you can't see them.
That is a terrifying miscommunication. Okay, the final pillar of daily life is play and exercise. We know they need it to stave off boredom and burn kinetic energy, but the text issues a very specific warning that surprises a lot of people. It says too much exercise can hurt them. I always hear the adage, a tired dog is a good dog. How can exercise be damaging?
We have to differentiate between cognitive fatigue and physical fatigue. Mentally tiring a dog is excellent, but physically exhausting a puppy can cause permanent structural damage. The skeletal system of a puppy is not a miniature version of an adult skeleton. The long bones of their legs contain epiphyseal plates, commonly known as growth plates. These are areas of soft, actively dividing cartilage where the bone is lengthening.
And those plates don't solidify into hard bone for a long time, right?
Right. Depending on the size of the breed, those plates might not close and calcify until the dog is 12 to 18 months old.
Wow.
If you subject a young puppy to forced, repetitive exercise, like taking them for a 3-mile jog on concrete, or repeatedly throwing a frisbee so they launch themselves into the air and land hard on their hind legs, you are driving concussive force directly into that soft cartilage.
Ouch!
It can cause microfractures, angular limb deformities, and guarantee early-onset osteoarthritis. This is why the article demands you consult your vet. All puppy exercise should be self-directed on soft surfaces like grass, where the puppy can abruptly stop and lie down the moment they feel fatigued.
So we have established the operational baseline. The dog is medically sound, fed properly, well-rested, and developing a secure routine. But a physically healthy dog that destroys your home and bites your guests is still a nightmare.
Right, nobody wants that.
This pushes us into the realm of the mind. We transition from keeping the animal alive to shaping how it interacts with the world. The source guide begins this phase by heavily emphasizing socialization windows. It states, expose them to new people, animals, and places from a young age to build a confident, friendly dog.
And the term window is neurologically precise. Canine development features a critical socialization period that generally opens around 3 weeks and rapidly slams shut between 12 and 16 weeks of age.
That's a tiny window.
It is. During this neurological window, the puppy's brain is undergoing massive synaptic pruning and formation. More importantly, their baseline fear response is suppressed. Evolutionarily, this is the period where they learn what belongs in their normal environment.
So if they encounter a person carrying a large umbrella, or hear a siren, or walk on a shiny linoleum floor during this specific window, their brain files it under normal environmental background noise.
Exactly. But once that window closes, the canine brain defaults to a survival mechanism, neophobia.
Neophobia, the fear of the new.
Right. If a dog has never seen a person in a wheelchair or heard a vacuum cleaner before they are 6 months old, their amygdala will flag those novel stimuli as potential threats.
Yeah.
And dog that feels threatened rarely cowers silently. They react.
They bark and bite.
They lunge, they bark, they bite. Proper socialization isn't just about making a friendlier dog. It is about inoculating their brain against fear-based aggression. The text suggests puppy classes, which is an excellent controlled environment to achieve this exposure safely while learning canine body language and bite inhibition from other puppies.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The article moves from environmental exposure to internal cognitive processing. It brings up mental workouts, suggesting interactive games, toys, and puzzles. We talked earlier about cognitive fatigue versus physical fatigue. For a working breed, or really any dog, how much horsepower does their brain actually consume when doing a puzzle compared to walking around the block?
It is an immense caloric and cognitive burn. Consider the canine olfactory system. The area of the canine brain devoted to analyzing odors is proportionally 40 times larger than ours.
40 times.
When you hide their kibble around the living room, or use a complex puzzle toy that requires them to slide levers to access food, you are forcing them to concentrate, to process complex sensory data, and to problem solve.
So it wears them out.
15 minutes of intense olfactory work and problem solving can deplete a dog's mental reserves and induce deeper, more restful sleep than an hour of mindless walking on a leash. It fulfills their genetic imperative to work for a living.
And seamlessly woven into this mental maintenance is physical maintenance. The guide includes grooming, brushing, nail trimming, ear cleaning, and bathing. But it frames grooming as part of their routine and health, not just aesthetics.
Because grooming is fundamentally an exercise in trust and desensitization.
Right.
If you systematically use positive reinforcement to teach a puppy that having their paws handled, their ears touched, and their fur brushed results in treats and calm praise, you are creating a dog that can be safely examined by a veterinarian.
Yeah.
You are preventing the development of handling sensitivities, which often lead to defensive biting when the dog reaches adulthood.
Which brings us to the methodology that underpins all of this: positive reinforcement. The text is unambiguous on this point. It instructs the reader to avoid punishment and harsh discipline entirely, and instead redirect behavior to appropriate alternatives. We discussed the amygdala hijack regarding potty training, but let's apply it more broadly. If a dog is chewing the leg of the coffee table, the old-school mentality was to smack the dog or forcefully hold its mouth shut to assert dominance. Why is behavioral science universally rejecting that approach?
Because aversive training punishment operates on the suppression of behavior through fear, rather than the modification of desire.
Modification of desire.
If you strike a dog for chewing the table, the dog learns that your presence is dangerous when they are chewing. They might stop when you're in the room, but the underlying biomechanical urge to chew remains completely unresolved. Furthermore, you shatter the trust bond.
You create a dynamic of adversarial surveillance rather than partnership.
Precisely. You create an anxious dog, and chronic anxiety degrades a dog's quality of life and shortens their lifespan. The Doggozila Guide advocates for redirection and positive reinforcement.
So what do you do instead?
If the puppy is chewing the table, you interrupt the behavior with a neutral sound, instantly offer them a high-value chew toy, and lavishly praise them when they engage with the correct object. You are actively building a neural pathway that says, chewing this specific toy is the most rewarding choice I can make. Treats, praise, and affection become your steering wheel, guiding the dog's internal decision-making process.
In all of this granular work, the genetic research, the neurobiology of socialization, the exact timing of the 5-in-1 vaccine, the dopamine loops of positive reinforcement, it is all acting as a foundation for the ultimate objective outlined in the final section of the guide: the psychology of bonding and unconditional love.
This is the emotional architecture of the entire endeavor. If you execute the physical and cognitive protocols correctly, this bond is the inevitable result.
The article defines unconditional love in a very specific, grounded way. It isn't just a warm feeling. It defines it as accepting the puppy as they are, even when they do something wrong or silly. It strikes me that humans are actually terrible at this.
We really are.
We project human motives onto animals. If the dog barks at a guest, we think the dog is trying to embarrass us. If they chew a shoe, we think they are being spiteful.
That anthropomorphism is the enemy of a true bond. Unconditional love, in the context of canine husbandry, requires you to strip away your ego.
Right?
You have to recognize that when a dog fails to execute a command or breaks a rule, they are not acting out of malice. They are acting on instinct, confusion, or fear. When you meet their failures with calm redirection instead of anger, you create an environment of profound psychological safety for the animal.
And the article points out the biological reciprocity of this dynamic. It notes that humans and animals both grow happier when they experience this unconditional acceptance, which reinforces belonging and security.
We can literally measure that happiness in the bloodstream. Yeah. When a human and a securely attached dog engage in positive interaction specifically through mutual gaze or gentle physical contact, both species experience a surge of oxytocin, the hormone responsible for social bonding and stress reduction. It creates a self-reinforcing biological loop. The dog lowers your blood pressure, and your calm demeanor lowers the dog's baseline stress.
But the text is rigorous about how this bond is maintained. It draws a sharp line between passive coexistence and active quality time. The mandate is clear. During this special time, don't get distracted by phones or TV. Focus only on your puppy. Why does a dog care if I'm looking at my phone while I throw the ball?
Because canines are masters of reading human microexpressions and attentional focus. For thousands of years, their survival has depended on analyzing our body language.
So they know when we're zoning out.
When your eyes are locked on a screen, your facial musculature is flat, your posture is disengaged, and your emotional energy is absent. The dog recognizes that they are interacting with an empty vessel. When you put the device away and offer them your undivided, focused attention, you validate their existence within the social structure.
And that focused interaction often takes the form of play. The article details fetching, running, and games, which we now know taps into their predatory sequence in a safe, constructive way. You become the conduit for their most thrilling genetic impulses. But after the kinetic energy is burned off, we enter the final and perhaps most nuanced phase of interaction described in the guide: cuddling.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of interspecies communication, the guidance here is paramount. The text explicitly warns us to pay attention, noting that some dogs prefer gentle strokes, while others enjoy belly rubs, and we must respect their boundaries.
This is a huge paradigm shift. The human expression of deep affection is the primate hug, wrapping our arms around someone and squeezing. But if you watch dogs interact with humans who hug them tightly, the dogs often look miserable.
Because to a canine, physical restriction is a threat. Being pinned down or tightly wrapped triggers a primal vulnerability. They often endure it because they are remarkably tolerant of human ignorance, but they will exhibit stress signals.
Like what kind of signals?
Licking their lips, yawning, turning their head away, or showing the whites of their eyes.
Which is known as whale eye.
Exactly. When the Doggozila Guide demands that you respect their boundaries, it is asking you to learn the language of consent in an animal.
Consent in a dog.
If you reach out to stroke a dog and they lean slightly away, the highest form of love is to drop your hand and respect their space. If a dog chooses to simply rest their chin on your knee rather than climb into your lap, you must accept that as a profound expression of trust. When a dog learns that you will never force them into uncomfortable physical contact, their trust in you becomes absolute.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed from the conceptual phase of mapping a genetic operating system down to the floorboards to view the world through an olfactory lens. We've navigated the virology of vaccines, the neurobiology of sleep and fear, the biomechanics of growth plates, and finally, the delicate language of physical boundaries and consent. It is an overwhelming, exhausting, transformative process.
It is the ultimate exercise in empathy. And it highlights a reality that permeates this entire guide, even if it isn't explicitly written in the text.
And what is that?
When we commit to this process, when we subjugate our own comfort to establish a routine, when we swallow our frustration and utilize positive reinforcement, when we learn to read the subtle body language of another species to ensure they feel safe, we are not just rewiring the dog's brain.
We're rewiring our own.
We are fundamentally rewiring our own. The discipline required to raise a puppy forces a human to practice patience, observation, and emotional regulation on a daily basis. We enter this process believing we are here to train the dog, But the rigorous demands of canine psychology ultimately train us to be more grounded, observant, and compassionate humans.
We are rewiring our own lives. We wanted the fantasy of the fluffy cloud bouncing through the meadow, but if we do the work, what we actually get is a mirror that forces us to evolve. That is an incredibly powerful place to conclude our analysis. Thank you for listening, dear Brigadiers, and if you have any questions, visit the source article on Doggozila Magazine at doggozila.com. That was all for this episode, and until the next time, bye to all listeners of the Bark Brigade podcast.